Welcome to the Reflections Podcast. Here we replay our wins and losses so that we can build more winning seasons. Let's get into it. So, for years, I've heard that experience was the greatest teacher. I don't really remember when I first heard that or even what I thought about it when I heard it. But is it true? For some, it may be, for others, not so much. But here's the thing. We've all had a lot of good and bad experiences in life. But did the experiences teach us? Did it teach us anything valuable? Or did we experience stuff and leave it on the table? Did we learn from our experiences? Did we grow from our experiences? Or are we just stuck in reliving the experiences? In today's podcast, we're talking about the students of your story. Your experience matters. Your story isn't just for you. Your experiences and lessons are valuable to others. Let's dive into how we can grow through this journey and use our stories to help others. Here's the reality. We all have a story that was birthed out of an experience. As I think about my experiences that I've gone through, some of the details feel like they happened yesterday. Some of the details are cloudy, but the lessons are still there. One thing for sure is that I survived some difficult experiences, whether emotionally, mentally, I survived them. And here's the thing. A friend of mine told me a few years ago that we've survived 100% of our worst days. We've had some crazy experiences in those worst days, but at the end of the day, we've survived them. In my story, I have stories of how I've won. I have stories of how I wanted to give up. I have stories of how I felt like a failure. I have stories of defeat, like utter, just like, man, this is the worst. But when I look back on it, or when we even look back on it, we have a lot of great stories too. A lot of stories that our perspective will create the greatness in them. So some of the things that we've been through, they weren't fun or laughable when we were going through them. But once we got through them, we were able to, for many of us, shift our mindset to understand why. After we go through an experience, whether good or bad, it's good to reflect on those experiences because one day, by remembering what you went through, you will be able to use your story as your win. People need to hear your story. You may not think your story is valuable. You may not think your story is worth sharing, but someone needs to hear your story. Here's the thing. You won't know who needs to hear your story until the moment comes that you have to actually share the story. And the story is more impactful when you can tell it from the perspective of wins, despite them being losses. So when I say from the perspective of the win, when you share the story, you're sharing the story to help. You're sharing the story to make sure that it doesn't die or is not unalived through you not sharing it. History can show us that some of the stories in history has been hidden. They've been lost because either they weren't written, they weren't shared, they just fell off. So every difficult experience holds a lesson. It's really a treasure, if you want to say it that way. There's a quote that says, "One man's trash is another man's treasure." What if your story, even though it was a trash situation, maybe your story is a treasure for somebody that's going through something similar? So I have a couple of points that I want to outline so that we can lock into the story of our students or the students of our story and the fact that our story matters, our experience matters. So the first thing I want to focus on is that we need to share the treasure with others. Our insight is valuable. Our experience will at some point be a roadmap to someone else, but we can't be able to, we can't be afraid to share. It is a treasure, even though at one point it was trash. As a teacher, I've had experiences where I was able to pull on my stories to help students. When they came to me and was like, "Hey, this is what's going on. What are your thoughts?" I was able to say, "Well, I can't give you advice or direction, but I can share perspective. My perspective on this is A, B, and C, but it's based on, I remember going through a time where this happened. I remember a moment where I was uncertain here, and this is how I had to process." And I was able to share through my experiences. Now, here's the thing. You've shared your treasure with a lot of people, but sometimes your treasure may have to be more public. In this podcast, my treasure is going to be more public because it's easier to share the treasures in this setting than trying to do one-on-one settings with a bunch of people. But your treasure may not have been a treasure at one point, but now you've learned, even from a business sense, when we're dealing with things in business, we realize that sometimes the things that we're going to share is process, is experience through loss. And now we can give somebody else the process, whether we charge or not, we can give somebody else that treasure because we've been through it. So when it comes to the experience being the best teacher, sometimes it might be, but we don't necessarily have to go through everything ourselves. By listening to the experiences of others, we have sometimes the roadmap. All right. So 2 is keep moving forward and creating new experiences. This one honestly has been tough for me sometimes. There's been some experiences that you will go through that after you finish going through the experience, you're like, man, I'm never doing that again. I don't want to go through that again. I don't want to deal with that again. So we end up pausing ourselves or holding ourselves back because we're like, I've been through that. But sometimes the experience was just to obtain the treasure. Sometimes the experience was not the full experience. It was the experience that would model the way to how we can improve, because growth takes time. Growth takes process. And we always talk about trust the process, but can we really trust the process? So instead of pausing our life when we have bad experiences, instead of pausing when we have challenges, instead of stopping because something went wrong, or instead of judging the whole world based on our 1 or 2 experiences, we have to keep moving forward. The way we move forward is we accept that there were controllables and uncontrollables, or incontrollables, whatever, controllables and the opposite. We've had those in our lives where we've wanted to be in control. We didn't get the control that we wanted. So then when we moved on while still holding on to the past. Sometimes we have to just let the past go. Your past experiences have purpose. They have power. They are the way that you get life moving ahead. So when it comes to your story, there are students for your story. There are students prepared to hear your story. They need to hear your story, but you can't allow them to you can't allow your stories to stop because somebody else needs it. So to follow back up on these 3, because I think I kind of skipped one. We have to, 1, find the treasure in our trauma. Your challenge, your struggle was not just for you. There's a treasure in it. And that treasure sometimes is for you to help you move on. Sometimes the treasure is for someone else. And once you find that treasure, 2, share the treasure with others. Don't allow yourself to hold on. Don't be the gatekeeper to treasure. Your story is powerful. Your experience is powerful. So again, find the treasure in the trauma, then share the treasure with others, and then next, keep moving forward and creating new experiences. Some of those next experiences will cause you to feel uncomfortable, but you can do it. So our takeaway is make sure to appreciate the experiences, even though they didn't happen like you wanted to. Your story matters. Your experience matters. And sometimes it's easy to get stuck in the thought of like, man, I've been through this. I feel bad for me. Well, okay, feel bad for you. But after you feel bad for you, what is the treasure? What did you learn? Even if you choose to not teach it to someone else right now, just be okay knowing that you went through something to get something. Maybe it was to get the win. Maybe it was to get the story. Maybe it was to get the experience, but you got something out of it. There are a lot of people that their stories ended in a way that they can't share it. Many of you that are listening, you have stories that will help someone else. Your stories create your wisdom. Your stories create your testimony. Your stories create your next steps in life. Before I close, I remember when I was in sales, I was working at a store and I would have to sell people. And the trainers would often say, build rapport. And the way they wanted you to build rapport was to have relevant stories, make sure that you understood what was going on. So when I would sell, there was often times where I would create a relatable story based on what's going on. Oh yeah, I've used this before. I've done this, and this is what happened with me. And then what happened is it built rapport. Your story is going to build rapport with your audience. Your story is going to build rapport with the people that need to hear from you and build from there. So reflect on your experiences. What lessons have you learned? How can your story help someone else? Take time this week or today to share your story with a friend, a family member, or even on social media. Just share the story. Somebody's going through something that you can help with, but you're holding the story to yourself. Your experiences are valuable and can inspire others. So thank you for joining me on this episode of the Reflections Podcast. I'm excited to share more stories, insights, and strategies with you. Together, we'll learn how to replay our wins and losses so that we build more winning seasons. Don't forget to subscribe, share with someone who needs a little motivation, and let's continue to grow through this journey of becoming undefeated. Let's be reflective. Until next time, keep reflecting and keep winning. Peace.